wilderness, people get lost. That's normal. They panic, walk the wrong direction, run out of food. Search teams usually find them within hours. But sometimes something different happens. A person disappears, and the evidence stops. Not fades, stops. No footprints leaving the trail. No signs of struggle. No sound heard. Just a last known location and then nothing. Search and rescue teams have a phrase they don't like to use in reports because it doesn't explain anything. It only describes the moment the search becomes impossible. They call it point last seen, the exact spot where a person was visible one moment and gone the next. Pause for a moment and picture this happening to someone beside you. You turn your head and there is nowhere they could have gone. No running sound, no direction to search, just the space where they were. That exact scenario is what we're investigating tonight. At first, these cases looked unrelated. Different states, different years, different victims. But the details started repeating. Children found miles away uphill. Injured people crossing terrain trained hikers avoid. Clothing removed in freezing temperatures. Tracking dogs refusing to follow scent or stopping suddenly. Not losing it, stopping. Handlers say it feels like the trail ends in mid-step. Now, one case can be coincidence. Two cases can be misreported. But hundreds start forming a pattern. And that pattern led investigators to something uncomfortable. Because the disappearances weren't random, they followed rules. For example, many happened near granite boulder fields, often close to water. Weather would change right after the disappearance. Search helicopters grounded at the worst possible time. Individually, each detail is explainable. Together, they form a timing problem. Imagine you're walking with someone on a trail. You turn your head for 5 seconds. When you look back, they're gone. No running sound, no fall, no direction to search. That exact scenario appears again and again and again across decades. For years, these cases stayed buried inside local reports, not connected, until one investigator noticed the same description repeating in different states, written by different rangers who had never met. And what they described wasn't an answer. It was a contradiction. People weren't vanishing deep in the wilderness. They were vanishing right next to others. So tonight we're not starting with theories. We're starting with the evidence search teams themselves struggled to explain. Because before you can ask who or what, you have to understand how someone disappears without leaving. And the first case happened in broad daylight, with witnesses only a few steps away. June 14th, 1969, Great Smoky Mountains. Dennis Martin was 6 years old, playing hide-and-seek with other children near Spence Field. His father and grandfather were watching from approximately 50 yards away. Clear sightlines, open terrain, good weather. Dennis ran behind a bush. The adults saw him go. Estimated time, out of view, less than 90 seconds. When the other children ran to find him, the bush was empty. Dennis was gone. Here's where it gets strange. The area behind that bush was relatively flat. Limited vegetation, you could see in most directions. A 6-year-old running would be visible, would make noise, would leave traces, nothing. The search started within minutes, not hours, minutes. Think about what that means. If Dennis had simply walked away, someone would have seen him. The terrain was open. The searchers arrived fast enough that a walking 6-year-old would still have been visible. He didn't have time to disappear that far, and yet he wasn't there. 1,400 people. Military personnel, helicopters, bloodhounds. They searched for weeks. And this is the part that bothered the handlers. The tracking dogs couldn't find a scent trail, not a weak trail, not a trail that faded. They showed confusion, circled, acted like there was no scent to follow at all. If he kept walking, someone would have seen him. If he stopped, the dogs would have found him. But neither happened. Think about that. If a child runs away, dogs follow the trail. That's not difficult. That's basic. When they don't, what exactly did they lose? What happened in that space that the dog couldn't explain? Hold that question, because it comes back. That shouldn't happen. 6-year-olds leave scent. They're at height where they brush against vegetation constantly. They should be easy to track. But the dogs acted like Dennis had simply stopped being there. Now at this point, most people assume the obvious. He wandered off and died of exposure. Body was never recovered due to terrain or animals. That would be reasonable. Except the same pattern, the exact same sequence started appearing in other cases. Not similar, identical. October 8, 1998. Same park, different location. Keith Parkins, 2 years old, playing in open campground area. Family had direct line of sight. Time out of view, approximately 5 minutes. When they looked gone, same search response. Hundreds of people, helicopters, tracking dogs. Same result. Dogs showed confusion. Couldn't determine direction of travel. Handler reported the dog acted like there was no scent trail at all. Keith Parkins was never found. July 10, 2015. Crater Lake National Park. Dior Coons Jr., 2 years old, playing near campsite. Parents estimated less than 10 minutes out of sight. Open terrain, limited brush, massive search. Dogs showed confusion. Couldn't establish trail. Extensive searches found nothing. Dior Coons Jr. was never found. So now we have a problem. Because this isn't happening once. It's happening repeatedly, across different parks, different years, different families who never met each other. Very young children vanish in moments. From areas with good visibility, tracking dogs fail the same way every time. That's not random. That's a pattern, and it's about to get stranger. When bodies are found, they're in the wrong place. Not slightly wrong, impossibly wrong. And I want to be precise about this. We're not talking about searchers missing something. We're talking about remains appearing later in locations that had already been searched thoroughly by professionals. The searchers didn't miss the body. The body appeared where it shouldn't be. April 1987, Yosemite National Park. Stacy Arras, 8 years old, experienced with horses and wilderness, hiking with family near Sunrise High Sierra Camp. Walked ahead to photograph wildflowers. Out of sight. Approximately 15 minutes. When the group caught up, Stacy was gone. Rangers called it one of the most extensive searches in Yosemite history. Over 100 square miles covered. Helicopters, tracking dogs, experienced searchers. Nothing. Stacy Arras was never found. September 2010, Mount Rainier. Samuel Bolka, 50 years old, experienced hiker, hiking near Paradise, heavily trafficked area. Samuel stepped off trail briefly. Out of sight. Less than 5 minutes. Gone. Search. Over 200 people, tracking dogs. Helicopters. Infrared. The area was open, not heavily forested. Should have been easy to spot someone. Nothing was found. 2 years later, hikers found remains approximately 1 mile away. But the location was wrong. The remains were in an area that had been searched multiple times, thoroughly, by trained professionals, in a location that didn't make sense given terrain, wind patterns, where a body would naturally end up. To reach that location on foot would have taken hours. The disappearance lasted minutes, and the area had already been searched. The cause of death couldn't be determined, but the location that bothered the searchers. June 2013, Sequoia National Park. George Penka, 65 years old, experienced hiker, hiking with church group on marked trail. George was at the back of the group, out of sight, less than 10 minutes. When the group stopped to wait, he wasn't there. Massive search. Over 300 people. Helicopters. The trail was clear. Nothing. 1 week later, hikers found George alive, approximately 1.5 miles away, but the location made no sense. To reach where he was found, George would have had to traverse extremely difficult terrain, steep ravines, dense brush, terrain challenging for experienced mountaineers, not reasonable for a 65-year-old man on a day hike. George was conscious but couldn't explain how he got there, didn't remember the route, had no scratches, no torn clothing, no damaged shoes, no injuries consistent with bushwhacking through dense forest. He'd been in the wilderness for 7 days, but showed minimal dehydration, minimal exposure effects, nothing matching what you'd expect from a week in the elements. The rescue team couldn't explain it. The location didn't make sense. The lack of injuries didn't make sense. His condition didn't make sense. But he was alive. And that created more questions than answers. In approximately 1/3 of these cases, weather changes. Not gradually, suddenly. Clear conditions when the person vanishes. Severe weather within hours. Weather that wasn't forecast. Weather that grounds helicopters. Weather that washes away evidence. October 2006. Olympic National Forest. Jared Atadero, 9 years old, hiking with church group. Clear day, warm, good visibility. Jared was with adults on a trail, behind the group by less than 5 minutes. When they realized he wasn't with them, they backtracked, called. No response. Within 2 hours of the report, weather changed dramatically. Temperature dropped, heavy rain began, cloud cover moved in. Conditions deteriorated significantly. Search was massive, over 300 people, tracking dogs when weather permitted. Searches continued for months. Nothing initially. 4 years later, hikers found remains approximately 3 miles away. Straight up the mountain, not on any trail. Not in any direction that made sense for a 9-year-old following a trail or trying to find adults. 3 miles, straight up a mountain, off trail, no logical route. July 2004, Crater Lake. An experienced backpacker vanished during clear weather. Within 3 hours, an unexpected storm system moved in. Heavy rain, lightning, helicopter searches prevented for 2 days. The pattern repeats. Clear weather, rapid change, search complications. Individually, that's explainable. Mountain weather is unpredictable. But notice what the weather never stops. It doesn't stop the disappearance. It stops the search. The disappearance lasts seconds. The cover lasts hours. The storm didn't cause the disappearance. It prevented the explanation. The frequency is notable. The timing is notable. The consistency is notable. Tracking dogs are trained to follow human scent. They can discriminate individual signatures, can follow trails hours or days old, can work in difficult conditions. When trained tracking dogs fail, handlers notice. Tracking dogs rarely fail. When they do, handlers remember it for the rest of their careers. So ask yourself, why do handlers who work these cases specifically describe it the same way, across different parks, different decades, never having met each other? That's what makes this different from a dog losing a trail in the rain. In these cases, dogs don't just lose the trail. They show confusion, refuse to work, act like there's no scent to follow. Dennis Martin dogs couldn't establish trail, showed confusion. Keith Parkin's handler reported dog acted like no scent existed. Dior Coons Jr. dogs couldn't determine direction of travel. Stacy Arris dogs couldn't establish trail. That's not normal dog behavior. That's not losing a weak trail. That's confusion, uncertainty, as if the scent picture makes no sense. One handler described it like this: the dog worked the area, then stopped, looked at me, like asking what I wanted him to do, not like he lost the trail, like there was no trail to lose. Tracking dogs don't guess. They follow evidence. Here, they behaved as if no one had ever walked there. Dogs don't refuse trails. They follow until the scent ends. Rain, water, time. In these cases, they behaved as if there was never a trail at all, as if the person didn't walk away from that spot, as if they simply stopped existing there. A lost person leaves a trail. These cases leave a location. Water can eliminate scent. Heavy rain, creek crossings. But many of these cases don't involve obvious water crossings, don't involve conditions that would completely obliterate scent. And the dogs aren't just losing trail at a specific point. They're showing confusion from the start. And here's where the pattern becomes uncomfortable, because now we have instant vanishing, wrong locations when found, weather interference, dog tracking failure. Individually, each is explainable. Together, they form something that search and rescue professionals privately admit bothers them, because it suggests the disappearances aren't random accidents. They're following a pattern, operating under rules. And if there are rules, something is creating those rules. In 2009, park rangers contacted a retired police investigator. Off the record, they wanted someone to look at disappearance cases that bothered them. Cases where official explanations felt incomplete. Cases where patterns were emerging that nobody was tracking officially. But before we get to him, consider what it took for those rangers to make that call. These are professionals. People whose careers are built on explaining the wilderness to others. Eventually, someone realized the reports weren't just similar. They were written the same way, using the same phrases, describing the same sequence by people in different states who had never spoken to each other. That's when they knew they needed someone from outside. Eventually, someone stopped asking where people went and started asking why these cases look identical. What if these cases aren't failing to be solved? What if they're following rules we haven't identified yet? The investigator was David Paulides, 20 years with San Jose Police Department, missing persons specialist, cold case investigator, not a conspiracy theorist, not a paranormal researcher, a trained investigator who knew how to recognize patterns. Paulides started requesting records, Freedom of Information Act requests, public documents from Park Service, sheriff departments, search and rescue logs, coroner reports. And here's what surprised him. National parks don't maintain comprehensive lists of people who disappear in their territories. The data isn't centralized, isn't tracked systematically, isn't analyzed for pattern. Each incident is documented individually. But those documents don't get compiled into searchable databases, don't get analyzed for connections, don't get compared across parks or years. So Beilhartz created his own database, case by case, verified through official sources, cross-referenced across jurisdictions. What emerged was a list of over 1,400 cases meeting specific criteria, cases showing unusual characteristics that appeared together with frequency exceeding random chance. He called the work Missing 411. David identified specific characteristics that cluster together. He calls them profile points. Not every case has every point, but cases tend to have multiple points. The more points a case has, the stronger it fits the pattern. The points include: point of separation is brief. Person was visible moments before. Time out of sight is measured in minutes, not hours. Missing person is often at age extremes, very young children or elderly individuals. Middle-aged adults, far less common. Weather changes during or after disappearance. Sudden, dramatic, reduces search effectiveness. Tracking dogs can't track or show unusual behavior. Consistent pattern across different dog teams, different handlers, different locations. Massive search finds nothing initially. Despite experienced searchers, extensive coverage, appropriate resources, body either never found or found in location that doesn't make sense. Location inconsistent with terrain, person's capabilities, time missing. When body is recovered, cause of death often cannot be determined, or injuries don't match expected pattern. Missing person is often found near berry bushes or near water. Geographic specificity that appears more frequently than random distribution would predict. Disappearances cluster geographically, not random distribution across all parks. Specific areas show higher frequency. These aren't random criteria Beilhartz created, they're patterns that emerged from analyzing hundreds of cases. Characteristics that appear together. Individual cases might have explainable circumstances, but when cases across different locations, different years, different circumstances share multiple profile points, the pattern suggests something systematic. At this point, you're asking the same question search and rescue professionals ask: what could explain this pattern? There are several possibilities. The pattern appears structured because human brains find patterns even in random data. The cases seem connected because we're looking for connection, but individually, each has explainable circumstances, even if those explanations are unknown. That's reasonable. Pattern recognition can create false connections, but the frequency is high, the consistency is high, the clustering is high. For this to be coincidence, we'd expect more variance, more cases that almost fit but don't quite, more exceptions to the rules. Instead, the pattern is remarkably consistent. Wilderness is vast. Terrain is difficult. People behave unpredictably when lost. Weather changes are common. Dogs sometimes fail. Bodies decompose or are scattered. The patterns might just reflect the challenges of wilderness search, not unexplained phenomena. That's also reasonable. Wilderness search has known limitations, but experienced searchers are the ones noticing these cases don't fit normal patterns. They're the ones saying, "This feels different." They're the ones requesting outside investigation because something bothers them. When professionals with decades of experience say cases don't follow expected patterns, that's worth considering. Perhaps these disappearances involve elements that weren't fully investigated, foul play that wasn't identified, accidents with circumstances that weren't documented, medical conditions that weren't recorded. The unusual aspects might have conventional explanations that simply didn't make it into public records. That's possible. Records are incomplete. Investigations have resource limits. Documentation has gaps. But across hundreds of cases, across multiple jurisdictions, with consistent patterns appearing that nobody is officially connecting, that would require systematic documentation failure. Possible, but less probable at this scale. Something is occurring in these wilderness areas that we haven't identified. Whether that's predator behavior we haven't documented, environmental factors we haven't recognized, or phenomenon we haven't categorized, the pattern suggests something worth investigating. Not paranormal necessarily, not supernatural, just unknown. Something that operates under rules. That creates consistent outcomes. That affects tracking dogs, weather patterns, search effectiveness, and body placement. Something that explains why very young children and elderly individuals are disproportionately affected. Why brief separations result in complete disappearances. Why remains appear in locations that don't follow terrain logic. Search and rescue professionals don't like this conversation because it implies their methods are insufficient. It questions their conclusions. It suggests mysteries in territories they're responsible for protecting. But many rangers, privately, will acknowledge there are cases that bother us, cases that don't add up, cases where we found nothing and can't explain why. One ranger, speaking anonymously, described it like this: "You work wilderness long enough, you learn what normal looks like when someone gets lost. They leave traces, they make predictable mistakes. They end up where terrain and behavior patterns suggest they should end up. But then you get cases that don't follow those patterns. Person vanishes completely. Dogs can't track. Weather changes immediately. Body shows up months later in a location you searched 6 times. One case, okay. 2 cases, coincidence. But when you see it again and again, you start wondering if there's something you're missing, something you're not trained to look for. That's the uncomfortable reality. These disappearances follow patterns. Patterns suggest rules. Rules suggest causation, but the causation remains unidentified. Paulides hasn't claimed to know what causes these disappearances. He documents patterns, identifies clusters, notes frequency, asks questions, but he doesn't insist on paranormal explanations, doesn't claim alien abduction, doesn't attribute it to cryptids or supernatural forces. He presents evidence and acknowledges he doesn't have complete answers. The wilderness isn't empty. It's just quiet enough that we assume it is. So here's what we know for certain. People disappear in national parks under circumstances that follow patterns. Very young children vanish in moments from areas with good visibility. Tracking dogs trained to follow human scent show confusion or refuse to track. Weather changes suddenly after disappearances with frequency that seems unusual. Bodies are found in locations that don't make sense given terrain and circumstances. Search and rescue professionals with decades of experience notice these cases feel different from normal lost person scenarios. And across hundreds of cases, these characteristics appear together more frequently than random chance would predict. Those are documented facts, verified through official records, confirmed by multiple sources. What those facts mean is the question that remains unanswered. Maybe it's environmental factors we haven't identified. Maybe it's predator behavior we haven't documented. Maybe it's medical or psychological factors we haven't recognized. The mystery isn't that people disappear in wilderness. The mystery is that it keeps happening the same way. Either hundreds of unrelated accidents across different states, different decades, different families are somehow producing the exact same signature. Or, the wilderness sometimes behaves in ways we don't understand yet. David Paulides didn't solve this mystery, but he proved the mystery exists, and that the pattern is still active. We keep building trails through these places. We keep walking into them, and whatever leaves that signature is still out there, still following the same rules, still taking people from the same locations, still leaving searchers with the same silence where answers should be. And the next report could already exist sitting in a ranger's logbook tonight.